All right, good. We're just back in time for Module 5. Module 5 in Care for Birth and After is circulation of body fluids and lymph general lymph. In fact, in this case, the lymph is more to do with anything that's not blood, right? So the circulation of fluids through your body. You will probably recognise a similarity between this and a module in one of the other workshops that we did in care during pregnancy. In this case, there's a slight difference because now the woman has given birth. There's a slightly different influence of how the subconscious reorganises the fluids after the birthing process. During pregnancy, obviously the woman needs lots of hydration, lots of water metabolism and so on. Afterwards, the focus is more on the lymphatic system to remove the excess fluids. So now the hormones are changing to produce more regulation of the fluids to eliminate them. Before, the fluid process was to accumulate the fluids and make sure that there was enough around. After the birth, that reverses. Actually, the electrical circuits to reverse it are very, very similar to the circuits to maintain the water. But you'll see in this process the challenge is the same, but the actual reorganising of the nervous system has a slight addition to it that makes the difference between during pregnancy versus after giving birth. So if for some reason the woman after delivering the baby has edema, has excess fluid caught somewhere in the body, often it's around the abdominal area and in the legs, but it can be anywhere. If the water doesn't obviously start to reduce by the second day, then there's a congestion somewhere. And the circulation of the blood and fluids is not working as it should. Now, where during pregnancy you hold both sides of the fluid challenge points on the top of the chest, if you have a look at the chart, you'll see here the 5 finger positions, 5 fingers held in this position on both sides during pregnancy. After pregnancy, you do one side, rebalance it neurologically, and do the other side and rebalance that separately, because they are different circuits, in fact, even though the neurology used to rebalance those circuits is very, very similar. The challenge is different. The challenge here is holding the fingers in this position for, what have we got, about 30 seconds, right? But just one side. Then we'll go through, as it says on 5.2, you tap lumbar L5, thoracic 9, thoracic 3, and cervical 1. Now, the difference between this and the other workshop was that we didn't have the C1. And in this case, C1 is a part of the process. So you hold one side. It doesn't matter which side you do first. You hold one side 30 seconds. Right? Then if you have a look at the other chart over here, you'll see that number 1 is the L5, tapping either side of the lumbar vertebra. The next one is T9. We're following the black points here. T9, then T3, and then L1, the atlas. So in fact, that's the position of that should be a bit wider because the atlas actually is a very wide cervical vertebra, but it's up the top here, so you're still tapping the back of the head. All right? So you do it in that order. Boing, 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 boing. Then you'd go back and do the other side, right? Hold that side for 30 seconds, right? Then come across and tap lumbar again, T9, T3 and cervical 1. Okay? Now, the reason you do it separately is because there's now a difference between the circulation system and the fluids moving through your body. When the woman is pregnant, that distinction doesn't matter much because both of them are as equally as important as each other. But afterwards, they are not necessarily as important as each other. And you need to remind the person that now that you're not pregnant, these different types of circulation need to be treated separately. Right? Now, someone asked me before, which is the blood and which is the circulation. I have to verify this, but I'm pretty sure the left side is the blood and the right side is the fluids. But I'll check that and let you know for sure what that is a little bit later on. So that's module 5. Let's have a volunteer type person and I'll show you how to do this in real live time. So 5 fingers, and we'll start on this side just because I can see where it is. She holds that for 30 seconds or more, but 30 seconds at least. That's the challenge. Now the brain's starting to pay attention to the circuitry that's connected to this, which it's actually called a body mode. It's sort of like a reflex type system. After 30 seconds, we have her turn around. Right. Now she doesn't need to continue to hold this. Once she's held it for the 30 seconds, the brain is at least paying attention now to know what the circuits are. So now we go down to the base of the sacrum, right? And we tap. Yes, you can do that. And then she takes a big breath in and a big breath out. Very good. Okay. Now we go up to T9. If you go to the base of the shoulder blade and across is T7, T8, T9 is in here. Big breath in and out. Good. We race up now to T3. The first bump down from the neck is C7. 1, 2, 3. And big breath in and out. Good. Then we go up to the atlas, which is just below the base of the skull. The skull comes down, and then just below that is C1. You want to tap in those 2 places. Good. And big breath in and out. Excellent. That's the order. If you do it in a different order, you're not telling the nervous system the right information. So it needs to be L5, T9, T3, C1 in that order. Okay, turn around again. Now you can hold 5 fingers on the other side, down a bit. So the collarbone is here. Where's your collarbone?
Press a little.
There.
Yeah.
So we rib down from the collarbone, so it's in that position. 5 fingers sort of in a circle. Good. She holds that there for 30 seconds or more, as her wishes may be. Okay, so then we turn around so you can see the points. Tapping L5. Breathe in and out. T9. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. Breathe out. And if you can tap here and here, down a little bit. There you go. And big breath in and out. Great. Good. Thank you very much. Good. Thank you. Good on you. All right, so one of the effects of that is that the woman will tend to want to go to the toilet more often. because that's basically how the woman is going to rebalance a lot of the excess fluids, is just to remove them. Now, it may not happen straight away, but sometimes it does. Sometimes literally straight after having done that, she'll want to go off to the toilet and remove the first batch of excess fluids. It can work that fast. And in fact, people with fluid retention problems, you have the same thing happening. Rebalance the fluids this way, and almost immediately they'll want to go off to the toilet and remove those excess fluids. And they could be there for some minutes. Literally, I had a client came in, she actually came in for a weight problem. But her weight problem was the lymphatic system that was congested. One of the things I did was the fluid and the circulation resetting. And she went off to the toilet, and I didn't see her till 20 minutes later. I said, "Where have you been?" She says, "I've been on the toilet." She says, "I think I've lost about 20 kilos. She hadn't lost that many, but she had lost kilos in weight just in those 20 minutes. Because just when she thought she was finished, oh, whoops, not yet. Right? So literally it can work very, very quickly. It's quite a good little module, that one. Remember to do these in the phases of respiration, because that helps to reorganize the lymph movement relative to the body functions and the organ functions. We have now module number 6, the last module in the workshop. In the processes of being pregnant, we saw from the other workshops modules to support that process, mainly fluids. After the birthing process, the fluid positions change. Instead of the fluids going down into the uterus to support the pregnancy, they now start moving back up to support the breastfeeding processes. Now, the breasts themselves are primarily made up of lymphatic tissue. That's really what they are. There's really a lot of lymph there. But the reason for that is that the lymphatic system can carry fats and proteins and sugars better than the bloodstream can. I will say it again because it's important. The lymphatic system can carry fats around, proteins and sugars better than the bloodstream can. So it can bring all of the necessary vitamins, minerals, proteins, fats, sugars, and put them into, via the lymphatic system, put them into the breast, and the little milk ducts in the breast then extract the milk and make the milk and have it ready for distribution. That's called baby. Now, there's some really interesting mechanisms involved from the nipple and how it activates the milk draining from the breast. It's very fascinating. Neurologically, it's an incredibly amazing trigger. The stimulation of the nipple via the baby increases the production of oxytocin, which increases the production of prolactin, which is the hormone that controls the development of the milk process. So the baby has to actually be sucking the nipple properly for the oxytocin to be stimulated and therefore the prolactin to be stimulated. If the baby isn't attaching properly, then the mother isn't going to be producing the hormones to make the next batch of milk. So it's important that the baby and the mother be trained to make sure that that baby is attaching properly so that the baby gets the full benefit from the milk and the mother gets the benefit of that full stimulation to be able to produce the next batch of milk. The ability for a woman to make breast milk is very, very flexible. In fact, women who have stopped breastfeeding completely can learn and re-establish breastfeeding again just by continually stimulating the nipple and having the baby suckle at the breast until the milk starts to come in again. They can, because of the stimulation of the nipple, making these hormones, they can actually start breastfeeding again. So sometimes women are going to have congestion, and it's usually a lymphatic congestion of the breast, where either they're making more milk than the baby can handle, right? So they're actually starting to get engorged breasts, there's just too much fluid in there, and this can lead to an inflammation of the connective tissue in the breast, and that's called mastitis. Mastitis, because of the congestion, will tend to block off the milk ducts. And so one of the things that has to be done manually is to continue to stimulate the breasts to excrete the milk to keep whatever ducts are open flowing, because that's really, really important. If all of the milk ducts close and get blocked up, the production of the milk still increases, but the tissues in the breast expand until the breast becomes rock hard, and it's extremely painful. It's so painful that some women will go to hospital because of it, and they will demand that the breast be cut off. Even if they don't demand it, the doctors would want to do that anyway, because that's what they know how to do best. You know? There are other ways of being able to unblock that lymphatic congestion. So instead of having the fluid coming out of the nipple, you can actually suck the lymphatics back through the back of the breast, back into the general lymphatic system, and so relieve the mastitis. I had a client ring me at, I think it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was one of the clients and one of the students, so we'd had a lot of interaction with each other. We knew each other pretty well enough for her to ring me at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, "Help!" She had mastitis. Her husband was an air pilot, and he was in some other country at the time, and she had been taking whatever homeopathics she could get her hands on, and she's been rubbing points and doing whatever she could, and it was just getting worse. So she rang me up and said, "You've got to help, my breasts are just really, really on fire." So some of the old wives' tales type remedies are you put a cabbage leaf in the fridge, all right, and you put the cabbage leaf on the breast. Well, all that does is it cools it down, but the law of action-reaction says if you put some cold on, your reaction is going to be to heat it up. So the end result is that the hot breast gets hotter, and that's not helpful. So if anything, if you have any heat occurring, and now doctors often mistake this inflammation for infection. It's not necessarily an infection, but because of the congestion, the histamines are stimulated, and that's what creates the inflammation, but without infection. So these women can still have very painful, very hot breasts, but not have infection. It's just because of the histamine reaction to the congested tissues. So a lot of the wives' tales will give like a temperature relief while the cabbage leaf or the ice or whatever is on there, but the reaction to that is going to be to heat it up, and that's not necessarily a good thing. The best solution is to drain the lymph away from the congested area. Well, it's congested, it's not going forward, so you have to take it back the other way. So what I did, I went to this woman's house, and really her breasts were as hard as rock. They were solid. I was actually shocked. I'd never seen breasts that hard before, except on a mannequin in a clothes shop. They were really that hard. And I said, well, we tried a few things. I said, well, look, the only other way is to manually relieve the lymphatic congestion. And I have an illustration of that here on the chart. You have it on your books as well, where the breast is here and you have arrows, directions pointing away from the breast. Right, they're the directions that you want to start rubbing the breast. Now you'll see that there is breast tissue in a very distinct area, and that tissue will become engorged and hard and then outside of that will be normal tissue, which will be soft. You can actually very easily define in mastitis where the edge of the breast is. So I've numbered this 1, 2, 3 and 4. You could do 1, 2, 3, 4, but always leave number 4 as the last set of directions, because ultimately you want most of the lymph to drain into the axillary lymph, which is under the arm. So you do that last because you're actually stimulating the lymph to go in lots of different directions, and then finally encouraging it to go into the axillary lymph. So the first direction is up. Right? So you just start rubbing the skin up. So I would be rubbing the tissues up this way, over the top of the breast, rubbing from the breast onto the normal tissues. And what's happening is that you're actually creating a suction, and you're sucking the lymph into the tissues around the breast. Remember, it's just fluid, there's just a lot in there. Now, in the case of this woman, it took about 4 hours of rubbing, going around and around and around and around, until the breast got to the point where it was free enough to go back to normal by itself. But she was really in an extreme situation. I mean, if she had have gone to hospital, they probably would have cut the breasts off, because really they become so congested that no fluid is flowing, then the lymph solidifies. And that's very hard to get moving, and extremely painful, because in those cases you actually have to get in there and break up the congested lymph manually, and that's very, very painful at that stage, because all of the connective tissue is inflamed. The woman is screaming her head off and wants to kill you, you know. At least this woman knew me and I knew her pretty well, so, you know, she tolerated what I was doing because she knew it was eventually going to work. But it was, even though I went really, really as gently as I could, you still have to apply some pressure to create the suction to get the lymph to start moving away from the congested tissues. So I just continued going around and dragging down, and then finally across to the axillary lymph, and I just keep going and going and going until I could get a bit further in. Right? So you're starting from the periphery, going around, and then getting further in, going around, further in. And in her case, we got to pretty close to around the nipple, where it started to release, and you can actually see the breast start to drain off the remainder of the congested areas. And then, like within a couple of minutes, her breast went from pretty firm to soft and pliable, like it would be normally, and the pain disappeared. Well, now that's not using any oils or hot or cold or anything. That's just purely a mechanical stimulation of the breast. And that by itself has to be done first in the case of mastitis. You have to get the lymph going back the other way. In traditional Chinese medicine, they have some very nasty remedies, one of which is encouraging the lymph to go away from the breast by using a little pointed hammer and tapping on the back. They tap on the back, and that draws the fluid from the breast to the back. But then you've got a really painful bleeding back because of these little sharp pointy things I keep hitting you with, you know. Chinese have got some strange ideas, really. But anyway, that will encourage the lymph also and all the other fluids, but it actually doesn't work as fast as mechanically draining the lymph. Right? So you can do the 1, 2s and 3s in any order, but always finish 4, you know, towards the arm. And just keep working on it until it dissipates. Often women get lumps in the breasts and they get really worried about it, but in 9 times out of 10, it's congested lymph. And they can do the same thing, especially if this occurs at certain stages through their menstrual cycle. Right? That means that at that time, the lymph is congesting. There's something going on with the hormones or some biochemistry inside them. And in fact, at the time that they have that lump forming is the best time to do the same thing. Just drain the lymph away, all right? And eventually the lump will actually disappear, and hopefully it won't come back next time. If it does, then there's something in the phases that needs to be, or the menstrual phases, that needs to be rebalanced. Okay, so you do that first because, while the mechanical obstruction is there, then whatever you do, whatever else you may do, is only going to be temporary, if it works at all. So you drain the breast lymph, 6.1, by rubbing the edges, start at the top, go to the inside, the bottom, and then the outside under the lymph. Always do the under the arm, not under the lymph. You're actually bringing the lymph from the side of the breast to the axillary drainage. 6.2, you can hold the breast, or the woman can hold the breast, and then rub the glabella, which is, as you know, the pituitary reflex. Rub the glabella for 60 seconds. And then you repeat the same thing on the opposite breast, but do one breast at a time. Remember, I mentioned before that women have this ability to put toxins in one breast so that they can leave the other breast nice and free for clean milk for the baby. Well, in the case of mastitis, if it's just one breast, it's probably the toxic breast. So there's a toxicity problem going on there, and probably, and in most cases what's happened is the pituitary gland doesn't know how to regulate the process of detoxifying. It doesn't know what the chemicals are, or doesn't know what to do with them, or it's just disconnected from them in the first place. So have the person touch the breast, if it's the mastitis one, after you've done the lymph drainage, touch that, and then have them rub the glabella. That's waking up the pituitary to pay attention to the chemistry of that breast. Then the other part, which you'll probably recognise by the point, is to hold the breast and rub in the centre under the clavicle for 60 seconds, which is your hypothalamus reflex, all right? And rub them relative to both breasts. Now you've got two reflexes and you've got two breasts, so you're going to have to do with one reflex on both breasts, the other reflex on both breasts. All right, so there's 4 processes there. So if you have, and you do from yesterday, you have the synoptics, the VOB. Well, the B part of that is the inflammation of the breast, which includes mastitis. Any itis means inflammation of. So if you have yourself or you have clients who have mastitis, you can use that synoptic on the person while you go through this same process. And that will actually, take it to a much deeper level. It may not be necessary, but it's helpful to have that there just to complete the process. So, do you want to volunteer your breasts for science? Okay, so Stephanie. Clothes on or off? Okay, well, it's going to be a public DVD, so leave the clothes on. All right, so Stephanie can show you how to do the breast drainage, right, just by dragging the breast up, all right? And so it's sort of like a flicking action, so you're literally trying to create a bit of a suction so that the lymph will try to follow the flow of your fingers, all right? And finish by going under the arm. All right. Now, women can do this if they get lumps in the breasts. If they have mastitis, obviously they have to do this. But also, some women actually get too much lymph in their breasts and they start developing large breasts, and then they go and get breast reductions. They actually have part of their breast cut out. They don't have to do that if they start doing this early. They can actually reduce the amount of fluid going into the breasts so they don't get too large, so they don't have to have those operations. So young girls who have large breasts should be doing this anyway so that their breasts don't continue to enlarge to the point where they have to have them operated on, because that's what happens. So that's the first part. The second part then is to hold the breast and rub the glabella. So she just puts a hand over the breast, that's it, and rubs the glabella. So that's connecting the pituitary to the chemistry of that breast. The only thing to be careful of here is if the bra is made of synthetic material, it doesn't make such a good connection. All right? So obviously the best connection is skin to skin, right, when she's touching the breast, so she can put her hand under the bra or in over the top or however she can do it and rub the relative points. Then she'd hold the other breast and rub the pituitary point again, the glabella. Now, this is going to help the subconscious to pay attention to where the woman is putting toxins into one breast and not the other. It'll actually start working on removing that toxicity. So then the breast milk doesn't affect the baby from that breast anymore. All right? Good. So then we do the same thing, but now rubbing under the clavicle here and touching the breast. Rub, rub, rub. Right, now we're connecting the hypothalamus's attention to the chemistry of the breast, which is helpful. Then the other breast on the same point. All right. Then we go to the other side of the clavicle and the first breast, and then change breasts. All right, so now we've connected the pituitary to both breasts and the hypothalamus reflexes to both breasts. All right. Now, the rest of the system will take care of itself. The lymphatic system is now draining from the breast. The pituitary and the hypothalamus are paying attention to the chemistry of the breast. That's enough to stop a woman from getting mastitis in the first place. Because if the fluid in the breast is not congested, they're not going to get the mastitis. All right? Now, if they do get the mastitis, they can do this whole process every 5 minutes if they want to. All right? Wherever they have the congestion, they can keep doing it. Like the client that I mentioned before, I was doing that solid for nearly 4 hours. I was so sick of her breasts by the end of the morning, I tell you. She was a lovely woman, but boy, that's a lot of work. But afterwards, she was so relieved. She was so happy because obviously she wanted to be able to feed her new baby. Her, at the time, like 2 to like 5 o'clock or something in the morning, right, was basically the only time she could get this fixed. Because she had a young son, right, that she wanted to take care of him, she wanted to take care of a baby, and with her breasts in this situation, she really could have fallen into the hands of the medical system and just wrecked her life. So she was very, very appreciative, and the breasts then were able to function normally. She could breastfeed her child, and she didn't have to go out of her way. She just fell asleep the next afternoon for about 6 hours and caught up on some sleep. I wish I could have done the same thing, but anyway. All right, thanks, darling. Good. Does anybody have any questions? Apart from Rosa, we'll leave her to last. The question is relative to the first module. How long before the birth do you start doing this? Is that the question? This is really probably the last month, the last half of the last trimester. Usually people have a fairly accurate date of when the birth is due. So if they just add a month ahead of that, they've usually got enough time to get the benefit from it. If you're going to do this a couple of days before, it would be usually because the position of the baby is in the wrong place. So obviously if the baby's position changes and it doesn't look like he wants to go back, then you do this straight away, any time. Doesn't matter when it is through the pregnancy. But usually you don't notice that sort of thing until pretty late in the pregnancy anyway. So if the baby's changed its position and it doesn't change back within 24 hours, then you'd think about doing this anyway, regardless of when the expected time may be. The question is, sometimes babies prefer to feed from one breast rather than the other. Does this indicate that the other is probably toxic? Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's probably the only reason why they don't like to feed from one breast is because the combination of the breast milk on that side is not good for them. And they instinctively know that, and they will spit it out, or just if they're forced to drink because they're really hungry, they'll latch on, but they can have colic and digestive problems and so on as well. So that last module of balancing the breast milk with the pituitary and the hypothalamus is a really good way of changing the chemistry of the breasts. And after that, the baby's more likely to have no problems from drinking from that breast and maybe even prefer it. So the comment relative to the baby feeding from one breast and not the other could be a mechanical issue about actually where the baby's positioning is. So they're actually not feeding well because they're not latching on properly, or they're uncomfortable in the position that the mother is holding them. So sometimes it's just a matter of changing the position, because the mum's right-handed and finds it easier for her to hold the baby this way, but when she's doing it here, the baby's uncomfortable. So it might be a matter of changing the position of the baby until it feels comfortable. I mean, babies are very fussy little animals, They want to drink and sleep and poo, but if you do anything outside of that, they will tell you. Right? But they're also very easy to please if you do the right thing. So they will tell you that too. They go, right? So experiment, play around and find the right position. And if you want to know more about the mechanics of doing that, ask Estefania, because that's what she teaches people all the time anyway. The question is Module 2, the libido module, useful during pregnancy? Yes, of course, especially if you like to enjoy your partner during the pregnancy. And if you have feelings like, no, I'm not interested, it may be that you need to have that done anyway. So sure, that's always a good thing to do. The question is, when there is a very sure chance that the baby will be premature, there is a practice of injecting cortisone into the lungs of the baby. This is a very dramatic procedure and is not done as a standard procedure. But there are some places that do that as a standard procedure because they like having heroic medicine. What effect does that have on the process? Well, in the process, not much, but it has a big effect on the fetus, because the cortisone is designed to reduce the inflammation. When premature babies are born and they want to start breathing, they're putting air into the lungs that are not matured. They're not functioning properly. In fact, they still are growing in many cases. So the cortisone is there to reduce any inflammation, but that doesn't reduce infection. The babies can still have infection, they just don't react to it because they can't, because the cortisone is there. Doctors seem to think that if there's no inflammation, there's no infection. But the cortisone removes the ability for inflammation to show, and infection can still be there. That's going to have a dramatic effect on the adrenal system of the child, and it's going to have an even more dramatic effect on how the lungs function. The chemistry of the lungs is very important when we're talking about its ability to extract oxygen and remove carbon dioxide. Well, this practice of injecting cortisone might be fine to alleviate the inflammation and therefore the aggravation to the doctors, but it actually reduces the lungs' ability to absorb oxygen and to remove carbon dioxide. So in fact, the baby produces higher amounts of carbon dioxide that damage the kidneys faster. So almost always in those cases, the child ends up with skin problems. And it's documented, And in fact, even outside of premature birth, the skin problems that children have at birth are treated with cortisone, and it pushes it back into the lungs. So they end up having asthma and respiratory problems because now the eczema is on the skin on the inside instead of being on the skin on the outside. It's a typical case of suppression. And cortisone is a very, very powerful substance in our body that is overused and is abused enormously, particularly with young children, to just eliminate inflammation. But that doesn't necessarily eliminate the cause of the inflammation, and then that becomes suppressed. So it's really not a good practice. And just doing the modules that you have here for post-pregnancy are also going to help the premature babies with their lung development. You just have to add the lung reflex points, which are between ribs 3 and 4, 4 and 5, 5 and 6 on the front. All right? Just rub these points in conjunction with the pituitary and the hypothalamus for the premature babies, and their lungs will actually, grow normally without any infection or whatever. The biggest problem with premature babies' lungs, is the lymph congestion. And these are lymph drainage points for the baby's lungs, and as long as the lymph is draining, the lungs will develop naturally anyway, and they don't need cortisone. That's almost a guarantee that they're going to have other chemical problems later on. It's sort of like becoming addicted to the medical model. The question is, in the case of a caesarean birth, they tend to cut the cord basically straight away, instead of letting the cord, finish its job properly. You have to remember that in a caesarean section, the baby is not at its full term, usually. And the placenta, it hasn't finished doing its job for the baby. So if it was in an ideal world, the baby could be taken out via caesarean section and then left so the cord can stop pulsing. But the trouble is it could pulse for days because it's not ready to be born, in fact. So this becomes a big conflict because it's like which is the worst of the two evils, having the caesarean section or cutting the cord and possibly damaging the kidneys of the fetus. It depends on the reason for the caesarean. If there's something wrong with the baby, you have to get that out of there, and you cut the cord and you do whatever you have to do to make sure that that baby's going to survive. In a normal birth, where it's not a caesarean section, they still want to cut the cord, but in fact, because the baby is born, it only takes a little while for its own oxygenation to take over the circulation of its blood, and it will stop the absorption of the blood from the mother through the umbilical cord. At that point, the cord stops pulsing. It's at that point you can either leave it to drop off naturally, which actually doesn't take that long, or you can cut it at that point and just let it finish off its processes naturally. But if you let the cord stop pulsing by itself before you do anything to it, you have no problems in damaging or risking the kidney energy in any way. But with caesarean, it's already an artificial situation, and it's not logical, logistically it's not possible to let the cord stop pulsing because it's not going to. Because theoretically, the placenta says, you haven't given birth yet. Just because you're outside doesn't mean that, we've finished our job, and it's going to just keep pulsing because it's still trying to grow the baby. So in caesarean sections, basically you have to cut the cord. And you do run the risk of damaging the kidney energy of the baby, but that can be balanced, and some of these modules can actually be used to do that. Yeah. And they send the father out because, he's seeing his his partner being cut up and his baby being taken out artificially and then the cord being cut, and he has no say in it. And the ego of the male is very, very fragile when it comes to that sort of thing, because everything he's been doing in his life has been built around protecting that woman and that baby. Well, he made the mistake of not recognising that he could prepare for that whole process and train his wife, and the baby for that matter, into being able to go through the process without the need for a caesarean birth. Caesareans are very, very touchy emotionally, not so much for the mother but for the father, because the system that males made to take care of females are really an insult to the male. He doesn't want things to be done to his wife, but the system will do it, and they'll just send him out of the room. And males, having that experience of helplessness is a terrible thing. Males are not built to feel helpless. So hospitals and doctors get sued regularly by fathers who witness caesarean births. That's why they send them out of the room. It drops the lawsuit down to 10% of what it would be normally. Because they don't want to feel helpless, so the way they help themselves is to sue the hospital or the doctor or whatever. It doesn't work because they've already signed a paper saying, I give my life away to you, you can do whatever you like. And if you don't like that, don't sign the paper. But if you're not going to sign the paper, you need to be prepared to be responsible for the consequences of what's happening. So, there's a lot involved, and people need to have a bit of counselling, to understand that when they're giving birth or when they're going to have babies, that there's a lot of responsibility and they need to work out their relationship to society and how they're going to have that happen. All right? And they're not told that they have a lot of rights to their own baby. They're just not told. So if they're not told, they don't know. If they don't know, they're easy to manipulate. And that's really what happens. Is there something the father can do straight after birth? Start running through the modules on the baby. Can only make it better. Why not? Start doing anything you know. Innate systems are really good for babies, and in fact, the innate systems would probably be the best place to start, because you're building the systems and getting the systems to work together at the very earliest experience of life. That becomes a reference for the rest of life. That would be a really good thing to do. Lymphatic system, circulation system, meridian system, get them all working together, and you can do that, while you're waiting for missus to wake up or to, get ready for the breastfeeding or whatever. In fact, the baby might end up enjoying having their points rubbed more than eating. That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Mummy, it's time for my points to be rubbed. Oh, go away, I did it 10 minutes ago. Oh, I need some. They rubbed their points. Oh, now I'm hungry. Oh, okay, now we have some food. When you do module 2, would it be a good idea to have the synoptics around to do this with? In fact, when you do your practice, you'll be using the synoptic that you got for the other workshop for that reason. Because the synoptic for the vagina, ovaries and breasts actually relates more to after birth than before birth, because the birthing process can easily damage the vagina and make it inflamed. The breast, obviously, because it's going to be used more now for breastfeeding and so on. The ovaries need to be reset relative to the change of hormones, so that synoptic that you have, VOB, vagina, ovaries and breasts, is really part of these 2 workshops, care during and care for birth and after, so that you can amplify the effect of these techniques. So you will be doing the practice with those synoptics on the person. So if you have those synoptics and you have someone that you're working with, then put it on them and go through the processes. As I mentioned before, especially if they have mastitis, because the B part of that VOB will help to deal with mastitis. That's part of what it's designed to do. So the question, I think, is if the woman is smoking or has been smoking and is told to have a few cigarettes once in a while to relieve the anxiety, is there some alternative to doing that? Yes, heart 7. The acupuncture point, heart 7. Down here on the bottom of the wrist, on the heart meridian, right? Rub, tap, scratch, kick, jump on, spit on, do whatever you have to do with this point, but stimulate that. So when they feel like having a cigarette, because they're anxious, rub the point instead. But that is never the only reason with smokers. Never. That's part of what they're suppressing with the smoking. The other part is, and what they can do instead of having those 2 cigarettes, is to smell the cigarettes. Just keep sniffing it until the brain turns off its desire for it because it thinks it's had enough. You can trick the nervous system into believing it's had a cigarette by the olfactory nerve telling the hypothalamus, the amygdala, that, hey, I've got enough nicotine now, I can stop smoking. And then they don't have to smoke the cigarette. Now that doesn't change the toxicity that they've built up in the liver and so on, but that will, with other modules, rubbing the liver point is going to help that. But it at least gives the liver the chance of getting to a point where it can detoxify. But if they're actually smoking, it's never going to detoxify. It's a habit that the cigarettes have created in the liver. They only have to have one puff and that habit is activated again. Well, you can get the brain to believe that it's actually had a cigarette by sniffing it, because the olfactory nerve doesn't require any other processing. It just goes straight into the limbic brain. It's straight in, it's a direct message. So just keep them sniffing the cigarette until they feel like, oh, I don't need it anymore, and they can put it away until the next time they feel like having a cigarette. Now that reduces the toxicity levels enormously, enough for the liver to start to recuperate and not influence the blood chemistry of the fetus. Okay, the question is, during breastfeeding, one breast is bigger than the other? Well, they usually are. Especially after breastfeeding one side, it's going to be smaller than the other one. So I'm assuming that you're talking about one breast that's always bigger than the other one, whether you're breastfeeding or not. Probably Stephania might be a good place to go to get the answer to that. My answer is, relative to your question, that's not necessarily a toxicity thing at all. Genetically, we are 2 halves, mother half and father half. And usually women have breasts that are different sizes. If you want to study this, you guys, you can actually check out the relative size and shape of the breast, and they're never the same. So in breastfeeding, right, the capacity of the lymph tissues in one side can actually expand greater than the other simply because of the genetic makeup of the person, because of the genes from the parent that influence that side. So it doesn't have to be a problem so long as the milk is working fine and the baby's happy with it. Then let one breast be bigger than the other. If it's bigger because it's not allowing more milk to go through, then actually the breast drainage process with the pituitary and the hypothalamus will balance that out pretty quickly. Can you use hypnosis for relieving the pain of the birth, the labour process? Yes, absolutely, but you should not use it to try to eliminate the pain. What I suggest to people is, and we have hypnosis courses or other courses called deep states, where we can actually teach people how to use their own ability to relax through the process so they still have 10% of the pain, and 10% is bearable and it's necessary for the subconscious to be able to complete other processes. But the mistake a lot of people make is they try to use hypnosis and other relaxation techniques and so on to try to eliminate the pain. It's not going to happen. Naturally, you must have some pain because your subconscious uses that as a measuring device. If there's no pain, like in an epidural, or as some accomplished hypnotherapists can do, is take away the pain completely, That means that the reflexes on the skin don't get set properly because the tension isn't right, and there are other processes that actually depend on the pain being there. It doesn't have to be much, right? So, practicing only having 10% means that you're allowing yourself to have the pain, so you're not in conflict with yourself, but you're determining how much you can have. And you can take it down to 10% very easily. And there are, easy procedures for being able to do that. The question is, would Module 1 and 4, the combination of them, be good for avoiding the tearing of the vagina during birth? I forget the name of that. What do they call that? It's the section between the anus and the vagina is called... Yeah. Episiotomia. Anyway, that area gets torn. Would Module 1 and 4 help in avoiding that? Yes, absolutely. The other thing is to actually practice stretching the area before it gets to the birthing process and massaging vitamin E into the area. That's a really good thing for, helping to stretch the area, and plus you can have some fun doing it on the way through. The other thing is to have the Schussler tissue salts of silica and calcium fluoride. Calc fluor is the elasticity element. It gives elasticity to the tissues, which means that they can stretch further without breaking. All right? Just a little bit of silica once every 2 or 3 days, but calc fluor every day will increase the elasticity of the tissues. The vitamin E helps with the elasticity, particularly the red tissues in the muscles and the structures around that area. And Module 1 and 4 will help the whole of the pelvic area to open up easily. So with all of those things together, it reduces pain automatically, the efficiency is there, there's no need for tearing, and so then there's no need to be stitched up later on. So the comment from Estefania, I'll do it as literally as possible because it's fun, is to practice squeezing the balls you put into your vagina. That's what she said. Or you can put other things in there. But actually practice contracting and letting go, because you're actually training the tissues to reduce and to expand in the letting go. Right? And it actually trains the tissues to be able to expand further without getting torn.
During the pregnancy, during the last...
At what time do you do that? Any chance you can. That's, the more, the better. Literally. The question is, if there's not enough breast milk, is there anything like homeopathics or whatever that can help to increase the breast milk? If you look at the modules in care during pregnancy, you'll see it's all to do with fluids and water. The reason why women have little breast milk is they have not enough fluid in their bodies. They can have the perfect chemistry to make the milk, but if they don't have the fluid to put into it, they won't produce enough milk. The other thing is they often are not, or another way around it, if you like, is to stimulate the nipple, because the nipple actually tends to produce the hormones that are going to help produce more milk anyway, particularly the prolactin. So it may be that they're a bit deficient in prolactin, but going through the rest of these models, there's no way that they can be deficient in prolactin, especially if you add to that the balancing your hormones techniques. Almost all of my clients who I've seen through the birthing process have the opposite. They have so much milk they don't know what to do with it. Really. So they can actually excrete it, put it in bottles for when they want to go out or something and the baby needs feeding. And a related question to that is, when a woman wants to stop breastfeeding and she can't, how does she do that? Well, there's actually a pretty nifty little trick you can do. You can always, go through the process of taking the lymph away from the breast often, and that will reduce the amount of breast milk that they produce. But another way, the old naturopathic way, is to put castor oil on the back. Just an area like directly behind the breasts, you rub castor oil on the back, and instead of the fluid going to the breasts, because castor oil is hygroscopic, the water and the fluids go to the oil. Right? So they actually end up putting the fluids that would go into the breast milk into the lymph in the back, and it goes out via the lymphatic system. So it reduces the amount of breast milk, and sometimes very quickly. So that's a way that actually does work. I've used that with a number of people, and it's worked really well. There are homeopathics that you can use to reduce the breast milk, but it's usually only in situations where there is such an excess of breast milk that it's because it's an excess that they want to reduce it, not because they want to just stop doing it. The best way to reduce the breast milk is to stop feeding the kid. Stop the stimulation of the nipple, and eventually the hormones will reset. And particularly if you're doing these modules, those hormones will reset very quickly, and the breast milk will dry up in a couple of days. All right. So Estefania has some extra bits for breast milks. So to summarise what Estefania said, one of the main reasons why there's not enough milk produced is because the woman is feeding the baby on one breast for a few minutes and then the other breast for a few minutes, and that's really not the best way to do it. The best way to do it is to feed for one sitting on one breast only, because they go through the sugars, they go through the fats, they go through the proteins, they get everything that they need to grow and develop, but also they are absorbing the hormones that set the mother up to produce more milk the next time. But if they're only breastfeeding for a short time on one and a short time on the other, they get the sugars first, right? They get all the sugars first, and they don't get the fats or the proteins. So they end up having fermentation happening in their gut, and they get colic and wind and projectile vomiting and the whole bit, because they're only living on the sugars of the milk. Right? It's really, really much, much better to, and I learnt this from Estefania, to have the woman breastfeed only on one side at the time. It's better to drink all the milk on one side for that sitting, and then the next time go to the other breast and do the same thing, rather than swapping over all the time, because you don't get the complete nutrition happening for the baby. It's a really important point. Thanks for that. That's very good. What can you do to avoid preeclampsia? Don't get pregnant. No, I mean you're already pregnant? Okay. Calcium. Make sure your calcium and your magnesium levels are up to scratch and the hormones are in balance. And, preeclampsia just can't happen.
What's about zinc? Because I know someone said that zinc is important.
What about zinc? You mean in terms of preeclampsia or generally?
Well, I'm thinking preeclampsia.
I'm trying to simplify the zinc question. Zinc, in its most primitive action, works on how you translate DNA into RNA. That's its job. It monitors that process. That's how we produce proteins. All right? Now, if we're not producing proteins in the right form, they can be creating the wrong actions in our body. That can lead to preeclampsia, all right? Which is, the people get cramps and they have all sorts of almost like catatonic states occur, and they can even lose the baby as a consequence. Zinc could be involved in helping a person with preeclampsia, but it's one of those minerals that women need to be having all the way through their pregnancy, not so much for that sort of thing, because the other modules will take care of that, but for the fact that allergies can disturb the birthing process and use up a lot of energy that otherwise could go to the baby. And zinc and the copper ratio is really important for maintaining stability with your allergies. It's also part of the nervous system requirements. Your nervous system needs zinc, and all the endocrine glands need zinc. So if there's too much copper, and in these days there is too much copper in people, then the zinc levels come up higher to try to maintain that proportion. But now you have excess excess copper problems and excess zinc problems. Even though the ratio is the same, you've got too much of both. Now the demand for calcium and magnesium increases. Well, usually people don't have the increase in calcium and magnesium, and that's what leads to the preeclampsia problems. So it's a lot more complicated than that even. But if you have a good, full, rounded dose of vitamins and minerals every day through the pregnancy, you're not going to have that problem. Preeclampsia is, I sort of equate preeclampsia with like scurvy. Scurvy is a deficiency of vitamin C. Right? So when we were talking before about the sailors going to Australia, most of them died from scurvy, which is, just a lack of vitamin C. They found if they put limes on the boats and they had a lime every day, they didn't get scurvy and they didn't, have problems. Well, if you have calcium and magnesium every day, you're not going to get preeclampsia, and you're not going to get a lot of the other things that you could possibly get too. So just a proper diet, good supplements, good quality supplements, not your cheap, fast pharmaceutical versions, good quality vitamins on a regular basis. Then when your body needs it and it's there, it can use it. But if it needs it and it's not there, then you can't use it. So it all comes back, all that stuff comes back to how good is your nutrition. You've got to focus on getting good nutrition. Then you don't have to worry about all of the labels that get thrown around, because they're secondary to bad nutrition. You've got to have good quality nutrition when you're making babies, because they demand the best and they'll take the best out of you, and you have to have just as good a quality to put back into you. Babies are just eating machines until about 26. So, you just got to feed them. But feed them good quality and they'll get a good quality result. And you won't have to worry about a whole range of possible problems. The question is, if you're diagnosed as preeclampsia from stress, is it really preeclampsia? I would say no. It's possible that preeclampsia could be a secondary event from the stress, but if you're having, good nutrition on the way through, it's really not preeclampsia. But you can have other problems from the stress hormones influencing the normal pregnancy hormones, and that can create the same sort of symptoms, and it gets misdiagnosed. In fact, in my opinion, from my experience, most of the women who've come with so-called preeclampsia are not. They're hypoadrenic. Every one of them. Right? So you put them on good nutrition, like Estefania said, get the stress cleared out, get them to calm down, because they're just not calm. They're tense as, anything. So, calm them down, de-stress them, give them good nutrition. Usually they need to be put into a better environment. They're fighting their environment. They don't want to be where they are, or they don't want to be with the person that they're with, in those circumstances. And so they get diagnosed with all sorts of things, really, and they're just stressed. Right? Just get rid of the stress. Best thing you can do for them. What would happen to the baby if the skin reflexes are not activated? They end up with hormonal imbalances. They have problems with their the creation of their sexual energy. They have digestive problems. And depending on what else is going on in their life, that could be accentuated more. But for most purposes, the symptoms that you'd see most often would be intestinal problems. Intestines, large and small intestine, particularly large intestine.
So can we activate it after 7 years, 8 years, like that, or it's over?
Can you activate it after 7 years after birth? You can activate them any time. Yeah, they're really easy to activate, but it may need to be done as a specific thing. Get the clothes off, warm towel, and just drag it down their body with firm but not hard pressure. Works every time. It's very easy. It's very good. the question is, when do we use the part of module 4.5, and when we don't, you do it after birth. Beg your pardon. You do it at the time of labour. All right, when the person started labour. In fact, you can do it straight after their waters have broken, because that's going to guarantee that the right time for the labour will take place. All right, now if you don't do it straight after the waters are broken, that's okay, but when the labour starts, that's when you do it. And that will guarantee that all of the contractions are going to be just exactly what they need to be all through the process. And if they start to drop for some reason, do the points again. All right? If a woman is, obviously not strong, all right, and those points don't help with the contractions, then you have to use the homeopathic.